Welcome to The Quill and the Quantum, the podcast where we explore the intersection of artificial intelligence and the art of writing. I'm your host, Kathy Norris, and in each episode, we'll talk to those authors and other creatives who use or refuse to use AI in their writing process. Today's guest is author Chuck Jacobs. Chuck and I met during the 2024 BoucherCon World Mystery Convention, where we both sat on a panel discussing artificial intelligence. Charles's stories merge his academic background in science and math with his professional experience in financial services to create thrillers that speculate on what is science possible and its impact on the human condition. His latest book, The $1 Billion Sugar Cube, was released in 2023. Charles, welcome to the program. And is there anything that you would like to add?
Nope, just call me Chuck.
Chuck, that's right. So Chuck, my first question is the biggie, is AI simply a tool that amplifies human intelligence, or will it replace human intelligence? How do you think of AI?
Well, I don't think it's going to replace human intelligence. I think it will enhance it. It will augment it, and it will replace it in some areas where rote. We're talking about large language models here, I assume, instead of the neural nets. So it'll replace the sort of low level, sort of the assembly line version of verbal work. So if you're just working on here, you're a law clerk, read these 10 cases and write a summary. That kind of stuff will easily be replaced with artificial intelligence. But I don't think it can replace real human creativity or ethical thinking and things like that. I think right now it just finds a good way to mimic a consensus view of people's verbal expressions.
I like that, a consensus view of people's verbal expressions as a result of working with the large language models. That makes perfect sense to me. What is AI good for, in your opinion?
Well, it's kind of things that exploit that. So, I think about how I use AI, I will use it for background information that I can verify. So I like to
Mm,
think of it almost as like the fairly intelligent person sitting next to you in a bar or on the plane
yeah.
plane in the seat next to you that you start talking about, and they seem to know something about everything. But after a little while, you start to realize maybe they're kind of a sociopath. So while they may give you a creative idea or make you think about something a way you hadn't, you got to like kind of trust it and use your judgment too. So I'll use it for gathering background information. I also used it as a way to look at alternatives for something I'm stumbling over in terms of how to say
Mhm.
it. So I had a paragraph or two, and it just didn't seem to like. And so I went to ChatGPT and I said, "Hey, how would Ian Fleming write this?" And it was more like a caricature of how Ian Fleming would write it, or how would John Grisham write this, or Michael Crichton. And then I said, "Oh, well, there's a good word, or that was a good way to put." And now, so I'll incorporate that into my own. And in that regard, it's no different than saying, "Hey, Bob, come over here a second. I'm having trouble with this." And he gives me a suggestion, and I say, "Yeah, okay, that's good. I think I'll use that." So, or if I'm looking for like, what are the good comparable books for my, to place it against it on Amazon, or what are good keywords to use for an Amazon search for this, or something like that, where again it's scouring tons of stuff that I wouldn't have time to do and be able to sort of pull out a couple of the gems.
Yes, I find that I use AI for research purposes, and the efficiency for me is that, and perhaps it's the downfall as well, is that instead of providing me with three or four different sources, it unifies the information and provides me with one response that hopefully reflects both the pros and the cons that I would have had to dig through individually. So in that
Yeah.
sense, I find it useful. I had read a survey from the Authors Guild. I think it was the 2023 Guild survey that said that 23% of writers report using generative AI as part of their writing process. But of that, only 7% said that they would use it to generate the text of their work. And I think that's what I'm hearing you say as well. You might pick a word here or a word there, but the idea of having AI write the entire chapter is something that's foreign to you.
Exactly. I mean, and then for a couple of reasons. One, you know, it's a matter of pride, right? I mean, how much pride do you have if you put somebody else's work out there and claim it's your own? But also, you know, there is this risk that it will incorporate, you know, more than just a word or two from somebody else's work. And so, you know, I really want to make sure that I don't take anything from somebody else. So in that regard, I'm really careful on a couple of things. One is I never would put personal information out there because
Mm.
questions you ask will become part of the base of its knowledge. So if you say, you know, read this medical report I just got and tell me whether I should be worried about it. Well, now your medical report's out there, and if somebody figures out how to ask the right questions, they may find their way to it. So you have to be careful with that. And then the other thing is just, you know, if I have uncopyrighted, if I were writing a book and I had a whole section, or you know, I would be careful putting it out there because again, if somebody could happen onto that information, and you know, I don't yet own the copyright on it.
Yeah, that's really an interesting point that any information that you feed into AI is owned by AI. And I can remember looking at a contract from my agent who said a new contract that basically said, if you use AI to generate this work, then there'll be problems in the representation. We cannot represent this work as your own if you use AI. And it just said AI. It didn't even say generative AI,
Mhm.
which I would have expected some sort of uh, narrowing of the term AI, but there was none. There was none at all.
Yeah.
Well, you've discussed some of the risks associated with AI. Are there any others aside from your information being owned by the web or owned by
Well, I mean,
AI?
there's the stuff that I simply won't use AI for. And one is just straight up creative. I would never say, write me a chapter that this stuff happens with these people or something like that. I mean, in
Hmm.
part, again, because it's sort of a sense of pride, but also to the fact that, as far as I know right now, the way the laws are written, nobody can copyright what comes out of AI, and so therefore,
Hmm.
you know, you would not own that property as opposed to something you've created yourself. So for that reason, I wouldn't do it. And for I don't know what there also could be legal changes happening in the near term that would end up retroactively making that an offense and or cause you to have to pull that, or you would be in violation of a law, and then you have to go back and undo all your stuff. So that's why I would not go down that rabbit hole. Certainly not without it being more, you know, clear as far as where the law would be going. And the other thing would just be I wouldn't use it for fact research that I couldn't verify.
Hmm. Yes, that is very important with the AI hallucinations. Although I understand that they're with each succeeding revision, they're getting better and better at non-hallucinating. But that the main argument that you stated that I completely agree with is it's the vanity of being the writer and the author. I you
I
know
mean, that's why you do it, you know.
I'm Kathy Norris. The AI can't hope to, create the things that I would create, or so I think at this stage of the game, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. And or, you know, even if it's better, it's not mine. So,
Yeah, yeah. Here.
but
Well,
as far as the getting better about hallucinations, I think there are clearly some things that, you know, like and it's probably most obvious in visual AI generation as opposed to verbal, where, you know, you see a picture of a woman in a flowing dress, and then you realize, wait a minute, she's got four arms, and like that hand has seven fingers, or, you know, there's a sign, but you look at the writing and it's just random key, you know, like brush strokes or whatever. And there it's pretty obvious, but you realize that same stuff can happen in verbals. And they're getting better about, like, okay, you know, hands only have five fingers. I mean, one reason
Mhm.
that AI just, you know, gets it wrong so much is that people rarely put hands in pictures. So it doesn't have a large learning base to know how many fingers
Oh.
there always should be. And then oftentimes you turn your hand and they're hidden. So as far as it knows, there could be any number of fingers there. So they have to overlay these things. But how do you do that on a verbal sense? I mean, how would you, it's hard to sort of tone it in on stuff that if it read it somewhere on the web, it thinks is true.
Here. Which leads me to the question, how do you keep up with all the changes taking place in AI? I mean, there's like a flood of information that's coming out every day.
Well, the honest answer is nobody can, right? I mean, and this stuff
Hmm.
isn't that old. I mean, I'm in a couple of AI groups, and everybody says, you know, the old timers have only been at this for, in this thing for 6 months or a year. It's like it's not like they know it all, and it changes so rapidly that what you knew about AI last fall isn't true this fall by a long stretch. So, um, I mean, there's a couple of groups in Cincinnati. I'm on a something called the Cincinnati AI Catalyst, where we're trying to work on issues to make AI socially responsible.
Hmm.
So things like one, making sure that it's available to everyone, so it doesn't become a technical divide between the haves and the have-nots. Also, there's a whole group that's working with the schools to help them, starting in first grade or whatever, get kids ready so that when they grow up, they will be part of the AI. They can use AI because, as the saying goes, AI is not going to take your job, but somebody who's really good with AI will. And so I think as much as people are nervous about AI, I think they should also be very nervous about not learning how to use AI and starting to incorporate so they understand what it can and can't do.
I agree. The more I used AI, and I started just as a lark because it was something I completely did not understand, which tends to intrigue me. Anything that I don't understand, I want to get a better grip on it. And that was about a year ago. And
So you are an old timer.
so I'm an old timer. Yeah,
You're
isn't
an
that
expert.
funny? Isn't that
Yeah.
funny? I mean, I to think that I was on a panel discussing AI at a writers convention, but still had was still proficient enough to have a basic grasp of some of the major issues, shows that this really is in its infancy, and we all need to roll up our sleeves and jump in.
Yeah. I mean, it's obviously been around for a long time.
Yeah.
I actually was exposed to, but they were neural nets back then. They didn't do the large language models, but that was like in the late 80s and early 90s. So
Hmm.
it went back pretty far. But I think it was only recently that it was other than a laptop experiment. I mean, it got to the level where it could be useful for everybody as opposed to a computer scientist or some other, neural researcher. So, and that's why I think that the use of large languages models that's a very new thing. And that's the thing that's maybe a year and a half old at the most.
Is there any one particular AI program that you use? Are you a ChatGPT person, or is Claude AI, the only way for you to roll, as I heard one guest say?
I mostly use ChatGPT just because it was one of the earlier available ones, and I paid for the higher level model, and I didn't want to pay for six or eight of them. I've played with Gemini. In
Hmm.
part, what I was trying to do was see, to a degree, these are like people that interpret facts. Are there differences in their personality? So I actually went out and found a free Myers-Briggs test online with 32 or 38, rate this from 1 to 5 or something.
Right.
And I put those two different models through it to try to see like what their personality type would come out and were they different. And they actually fell in the same bucket, but there were differences in terms of how intuitive one was or whatever on some of these. Now, to the degree you believe the test, but I
Uh-huh.
would love to get like an MMPI, like, thing it's used to diagnose like psychoses and
This is,
neuroses,
yes.
and actually run that through like five or six of these things and actually say, okay, this one's a sociopath, or this one, has larceny tendencies or whatever, and see what it says. But that would be quite an undertaking, and I haven't found a free MMPI online to use.
Oh, that's a great idea. And you know what? It would make a great novel too, frankly, if your protagonist was able to do that and discovered that the AI was sociopathic or psychopathic,
And then
what
exploit that, yeah.
and then exploit it, which is a great lead into the $1 billion sugar cube. Tell us about your latest book. I
Okay.
yeah, I want to hear all about it.
So the premise here is that way back when in college, some guy gets the idea that he's going to analyze songs and people's voices and so on, and figure out what in it makes people feel, uplifted or sad or whatever. And so the idea is to sort of like find a way to portray the elements of sound in these things, and then have people fill out surveys after they listen to it and describe what their moods are or whatever, and then draw correlations between that. Well, this gets sort of weaponized as it goes along to the point where the bad guys have this massive computer, and it's based on it's an optical computer instead of electronic, and it uses like LEDs and so on to control it. And so that's the $1 billion sugar cube. It's this huge computer. But what they've programmed it for is not artificial intelligence, but artificial emotion. So this thing responds to sounds and indicates emotion the way a human would. And then they're using this to develop ever more powerful sounds that eventually can sort of take over the mind and force it to extreme emotional states as a weapon of war. And the premise is kind of that the evolution of global battles has gone from, fighting over land and serfs with swords and armor,
Mhm.
and then it was sailing around the world and plundering resources with guns and boats, and then it was mechanized armies to garner natural resources, iron and oil and so on. But that you can't fight this world battle with the weapons of the old. But now we're in this fourth world war, which is about not land or serfs or plunder. It's about hearts and minds. And that in this battle, you can't win hearts and minds with atomic bombs and hand grenades. You have to win it with tools like this. And this will effectively become the weapon that wins this world war. And so the good guys are trying to race to stop them from doing that.
Well, which the good guys always do in our thrillers. This is fascinating to take a look at this historical progression of warfare, and speculate again where we come into that phrase "science possible." And would you define science possible for the audience?
Yeah, it's like I'm not a big fan of science. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. I don't, it
Hmm.
doesn't appeal to me. True science fiction with, starships and ray guns and, way in the future. And I like stuff that's kind of like, gee, what if this were going on somewhere right now and we don't know about it?
Hmm.
And how could that be used, sort of against people? And what are some of the implications for that? So my first book, the prequel to this one, was about genetic engineering.
Hmm.
And the bad guys they engineered a virus that they're going to spread around the globe. It came out in February of 2020. Not a good time to do that. But the
Oh.
premise here was that it was like, instead of coming out of a lab in China, came out of a lab at the University of Illinois. And so the bad guys have a plan for what they're going to do to fix the world that involves this virus. And so the protagonist, David Blum, stumbles onto this. He's just an investment advisor who goes back home for his dad's funeral and gets mixed up in all this because it turns out his dad learned about it and was killed. Um, and so then the $1 billion sugar cube picks up where he joins this international organization that's fighting human disasters. And his first assignment ends up dumping him into the middle of this artificial emotion thing.
Well, I just love the pairing of artificial emotion and artificial intelligence. It's intriguing, and you have opened up a question that's coming totally from left field when you mentioned financial management, and I assume that you were working with high net worth individuals. And so my question for you is, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Your interest in gourmet foods and wines,
Oh,
or and the work with uh, uh, high net worth individuals, or the other way around?
oh well, I'd have to say the food. I've always enjoyed food. I started doing cooking actually fairly young because my mom she could be a good cook, but she didn't put a lot of effort into it.
Uh-huh.
And so, if I wanted something interesting, I kind of had to do it on my own. Also, once I was running track in high school, I get home and like I might get home after everybody else had eaten. So the stuff would be there for me to cook for myself. And so I'd have to come up with something. So anyway, but I've always enjoyed the food. I never actually managed money for somebody. I did
Hmm.
consulting work to the financial services industry.
Gotcha.
So I've done a lot of work with banks, investment banks, insurance companies, and so on. And I actually did a big project for what was Swiss Bank Corporation in London. And we looked at their private client business and all that stuff. And that was really interesting how that was structured with the numbered accounts and the rules around sort of what they would and wouldn't let people do with their money in the world and all that. This was the heyday of, the
Oh, the
secret
80s.
accounts and all that kind of stuff. So that was part of the inspiration for, in the back of my mind for some of the stuff in the first book, because that's kind of the kind of bank that the protagonist works for. He's ex-FBI, so he did financial crime stuff, and then he kind of leaves that and goes into work for one of the banks and manages money for very secretive people.
Well, thank you for that answer. I was curious. And is there anything else that you would like to add about either AI or cooking or anything at all?
I could talk for days about cooking, but as far as AI goes, I thought, we were on that panel together at
Hmm.
BoucherCon. I think authors had a lot of, I think, deep concerns. And I think some of them are, it's worth being concerned about, but I also think it's inevitable in some way, or it's overblown. So one of them was the idea that AI was going to replace them. And I
Hmm.
think that if you're just, again, like summarizing other people's work or doing, like ad copy or something like that, I think AI could very easily, because it's not, you need to be skilled at it, but it's not like groundbreaking creativity. Um, but think about the same thing with like photography. New technology. You had oil painters out there, a lot of them that just, I want to sit and get a portrait to put on my wall or give to my friend. You could get a photograph and it saved time. So there was a lot less need for that kind of oil painting, but it allowed the painters then to become amazingly creative, because people didn't necessarily want a picture of something that looked like something. So impressionism and expressionism and abstract could all evolve because it was free from being the portrayal of reality. And photography also, created new industries. So that I don't think there was anything as a like a crime scene painter or something like that. As opposed, it opened up new jobs too. So I think we have to kind of see it that way in the verbal realm.
I agree. Just in the short time that I've been doing this podcast, the tone of the writers and creatives that I've been interviewing has changed from outright fear and anger to more of a willingness to explore, a more moderate tone. It's good for some things, it's not good for other things. But just taking that very first step is the hardest, it appears. But nowadays I don't talk to anyone who's never used ChatGPT the way I did 6 to 8 months ago. And
Hmm.
I've had people who I interviewed originally and were very much anti-AI, who now, according to their latest newsletters, are sort of embracing it with both hands and at least
Yeah.
getting their hands dirty, which is what you have to do. That's what you
Yeah.
have
I
to
mean,
do.
again, if not, you're going to be left behind.
Hmm.
You've got to get in it. The other thing is, people talk about, well, it's too easy. It's cheating to have it do creative work. And I think I raised that at the conference. It's like, well, what about a ghostwriter? You're paying someone else to be creative, and you're going to put your name on it. I mean, I think from a moral equivalency, it's kind of the same thing. I mean, obviously, it's a whole lot easier to pay what, $12 a month or whatever ChatGPT, the better version is, and just have it do your work for you. I mean, you can kick out 3 books a week or a day even. So maybe that's the real issue. But I mean, from a is it right or wrong point of view, I don't know that it is that bad compared to having a ghostwriter. I mean, that always kind of puzzled me anyway, like that using a ghostwriter.
Oh,
Um,
seriously. And I just assume these days that when I see a celebrity books, I just assume that a ghostwriter is involved
Somebody else
somewhere.
wrote it. Yeah.
Yeah, somebody else wrote it. My listening to people talk, and then that's the other thing. You can tell who's using AI because usually the language skills in their emails is vastly different from the language that they're using in formal letters and things that they're sending out. And I realize, oh, that person used AI to write that letter, as opposed to the emails to me, which are probably more reflective of their actual language and writing skills, and
Yeah.
not nearly as good. So,
Well,
um,
that was sort of my next point, was like people criticize it. Well, it's bad. I mean, it's not good writing. But I mean, you think of it, it is to verbal skills what, daguerreotypes were photography. I mean,
mhm.
these are early days. It will get better. And I think that, I don't think that that's a reason to, fear it or not use it. I think it will get better. The other thing is there are better systems. I mean, if you're really going to use it to try to portray yourself, there are systems that you train on your own material. So rather than
Yes.
just asking ChatGPT to, write me a short story, you say, here's my 3 books I've written, and it consumes it. Now write a book in my style. And then it will be using, it'll be much closer to what you would say as opposed to a generic ChatGPT answer.
What do you
Um,
think the minimum amount of information you would need to feed AI in order for it to duplicate your work or attempt to duplicate your work? You said three. You said three novels, and
I made that. I mean, I just pulled that out of the air. I
sure.
don't know. I know that there are tools you can get to subscribe to where you take video of yourself, like, podcasts, and you
Hmm.
put it in there and it creates an AI avatar. And you put in text or you can take a prompt or whatever, and it will generate a video of you answering those questions. Um,
Wow.
and in fact, there's a monthly AI get together, AI meetup in Cincinnati, and the woman that runs that, Helen Todd, she'll often start the meeting and she'll have the PowerPoint up, and then she'll have her avatar like introduce the day, and as long as you don't pretend that it really was you, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. But it's getting better and better. And you think about where it was a year ago versus now, I
Hmm.
think 5 years from now it'll be indistinguishable, and that's where I think the real risks in AI are in these deep fakes. And not only that, whether that's the fake themselves, but the ability to produce fakes like that then destroys people's confidence in whether they're looking at something that is real or not. You know,
Totally, totally. I don't
video
take
camera
anything for
evidence in court and all this stuff. It's like, well, it was AI.
well, yes, you can see it today. I no longer trust anything that I see, any images that I see, which is truly I my first reaction is, did that Olympic athlete really, when I'm looking at this on YouTube, did that Olympic athlete really do those flips, or was it AI enhanced?
I mean, the old days you say like visual, like personal witnesses are notoriously unreliable.
Yes.
But you had the videotape. Now it's going to be, well, do we have, how many personal witness, individual witnesses, real witnesses do we need? Because nobody's going to believe the videotape. And we go back to the, he said, she said kind of stuff.
Very
Um,
circular.
and the other one is, I think, the other risk right now is collation of personal information.
Hmm.
So there was a huge data breach recently, and everybody's getting letters saying, your social security number has been and that was apparently a company that um, all they did was scour public information and put it together.
Hmm.
And they were a company that supposedly you go to for background checks. So they would scour legal records and license, plate records and everything they could get their hands on, and then link it all together so that if you asked them about somebody, they knew everything about them. So now supposedly they didn't get any breached data. They weren't revealing anything that was given to them in confidence. But the ability to put that together means that like maybe as many as 1 billion people right now have most of their personal life out there on the dark web. The same thing can happen with AI. And while AI has filters, supposedly that won't answer certain questions, you can get around it. So if you ask, like,
Hmm.
how do I build an atomic bomb? It'll say, I'm not allowed to tell you that. But if you say, tell me about the Manhattan Project, tell me about so and so's work. What was the issue he was trying to face? How did he find a way around that? What did he discover? And it'll end up revealing all the nits and bits that you need to build an atomic bomb. And so it's out there and it becomes a tool that it's like a big brother that's just reading everything.
Oh, this is true. I can remember I was in one of my novels, I was going to have a character commit murder. And so I went to ChatGPT and said, how would you kill someone with a knife? I'm just making this up. And of course, the immediate response was, well, conflict can be resolved in other ways aside from
Yeah.
violence, and I had to go back and say, ChatGPT, you are a novelist, writing a scene. How would your character use a knife to in the life of this other character? But you're right, it can be worked around. But I did have to. That first response I hadn't expected.
Yeah. And so, there's a lot of stuff out there that it can, because it's sort of like somebody who's read everything and remembers everything. And so they can put the stuff together in a way that a human would just have trouble dissecting. So I
Hmm.
think that's a concern right now. And then in terms of the future, I think there's two big risks. One is, like people figuring out how to game the system. So you think
Hmm.
about like early search engines, you said, books on, origami or, and it would go out there and you might give it some more particulars and it would find you those books and it would list the ones based on how closely they matched your search. Well, then eventually people figured out how to like, oh, I know what to do on my website. I'm going to put, bury, somewhere in the writing about Kim Kardashian. And that way everybody who searches on Kim Kardashian is going to see my book on origami or something, so that people would game it knowing how it worked. And then the flip side, of course, is that then all the search engines figured out that, well, we can do that too. So if you're willing to pay us for this, that, or other thing, we'll make sure you get higher on the search list. And you think about if people start to become totally reliant on some of these AI systems, and it turns out that one, the answers that it's looking for, it can get fooled because people have figured out how to make them very noticeable, but also that, OpenAI or one of these other companies decides that they can start having sponsored answers, and
Mm.
those are the ones that you'll hear. And unlike Google, where you get, you can go through all the pages if you want to, ChatGPT, it's not a search result, it's an answer. And so that answer, you don't know how much of its effectively subjectivity it's put on that, which is obviously not totally subjective. It's somebody's told it that, hey, favor the people that, already have subscriptions to ChatGPT or whatever it is. And so in that point, can you really trust this? The answers you're getting. Is that really the best answer or the right answer? Or is that just the answer that favors the people that bought the right subscription or whatever?
Well, it sounds like that the thought that you need, when it comes to AI, you need a human being at the beginning and at the end of the process to sort of um, to vet the responses still holds true.
Yeah,
Yeah, it still holds true.
but that's true of a person. Like you wouldn't hire one person in your company to answer all your questions.
Nope,
Certainly not the
hopefully
really big
not.
ones.
Hopefully not. Oh,
You want a
that
committee or something to like, oh, is that really a good answer? Or let's think about that one.
here, here, here.
Um, So yeah, I mean that's I think people can get over reliant. The other thing is, of course, that it is it is like a sociopath in that, the one way I like to think about an AI, a large language model, it's like a kid who never went to school, never had any friends, spent 12 years locked in the basement doing nothing but surfing the web. And so you ask it to compare Socrates to Aristotle or whatever, and it can give you all the facts and lay it out. You can ask it all sorts of questions, but then you ask it the wrong question, and suddenly it's telling you that, Hillary Clinton eats aborted fetuses for breakfast in the morning or whatever, because it read it somewhere and it doesn't know whether that's true or not. It just knows that people are saying. And so I'm going to tell you that, it can't filter it that way.
No, it can't.
And in fact, in the book, I actually have the two of the people are talking and they're actually talking about the Turing test. And the Turing test is, of course, what questions could you ask a computer to figure out if it's really a computer or a person you're talking to?
Hmm.
And the question that the woman suggests is, what's sadder, a baby crying for his mother or a mother crying for her baby?
Hmm.
And of course, humans go, oh God, the mother, my God, there's like babies cry about everything, but, a mother crying over her baby, that's so sad. And I asked ChatGPT that. And it gave me this very well articulated paragraph that said it could certainly see how both those situations could be sad. It would need more facts to make to say that one was necessarily more sad than the other one and blah, blah, blah. The way somebody who had no feeling would answer a question, like they're telling you the information, but they don't have any emotion. And I think that's the thing that, that and some sense of ethics are the two things that are missing in AI systems. It's got all the logic and knowledge and facts at its fingers, true or false, statements of fact, but it can't really filter that through ethical or emotional filters the way humans do, because they don't just read books. They go out in the playground and get hurt and
Hmm.
figure out they've hurt somebody and they don't feel good about that and they learn the difference and that kind of stuff.
Well, I think that's a very good place to stop, because we've brought everything back full circle about that original question as to does it amplify human intelligence, a tool that amplifies human intelligence, or is it replacing? And the answer, especially when it comes to moral and ethical issues, is right now, no. And
Yeah.
I always give the caveat of right now because things change so rapidly, but this is where we are.
Yep. For better or
Well,
worse.
well, Chuck, where can people pick up copies of the Billion Dollar Sugar Cube?
Well, as the saying goes, anywhere that books are sold.
It's
Uh,
everywhere that books are
I
sold.
mean, you can go to Amazon or Barnes and Noble or whatever, or you can walk into your local bookstore. If they don't have it on the shelf, they can get it in a couple of days. It last I guess it was spring. Yeah, I came out with an audio book version of the Billion Dollar Sugar Cube, narrated by Dion Graham, and I think we're going to work on the audio book of the first one later this fall,
Well, and
and then
people
it's
have to
available
go to your
ebook.
website and see the trailer. That I thought was
Yes.
fascinating, for sure.
Yep. Well, yep. Hope people do. And thank you very much for having me.
You're most welcome. And what is the trailer can be found on your website, which is what is the address for that?
Just charlesjacobs.com.
Okay.
Or you can,
Um,
if you go out to YouTube, you can look up the Billion Dollar Sugar Cube or the Pangea Solution, and it'll actually there's a couple different videos out there. There's some are longer, some are shorter.
well, great. Chuck, thank you very much for spending time with us today on the Quill and the Quantum.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me.